All right, welcome back to another episode of the Wilderness Fitness Podcast. Today I am joined by Dr. Drew with Align PT. He is a physical therapist. He actually graduated from the University of Madison, and him and I got linked up through a mutual connection from a home exercise program app. And he's like, "Hey, this other PT was like, hey, you got to check out this PT out in Bend, Oregon." He's got a pretty similar business model. So thank you for taking the time tonight first to hop on and do this.
Of course, man.
Two, this is only the second time you and I have actually talked. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit, who you are, what you like to do, and the inspiration for starting Align PT.
Yeah, totally. Like you said, mostly I think when we talked before is mostly just about spitballing ideas and different stuff, getting to know each other. But yeah, I mean, I started this for a pretty common reason, which is something I dealt with. So I can certainly get into that. But hobbies wise, what I like to do, like you said, I'm Bend, Oregon. I went to school in Madison, Wisconsin. I like to been fishing a lot, been fly fishing out here, been skiing, that kind of stuff. My hunting experience is limited. I was like, that's mainly only like upland game stuff like quail, pheasants, and growing up in Northern California, but mostly shooting clay pigeons and just messing around. So in terms of what you do, that's kind of, yeah, I like to fish more than anything. But yeah, why I started this was I dealt with dizziness myself. A lot of things can cause dizziness. I know we talk about today some of the ways it can impact you in terms of traveling, feeling comfortable in busy places, or wind blowing, trees moving, all that kind of stuff. But basically going through it and not being super thrilled with the help I got. There was a lot of confusion, fear. Dizziness is scary. It's disorienting to be dizzy and not know why. I always tell people it can feel like you're lost in the woods at dark. You don't really know what to do. You're not sure where to go, what to try, but it's scary and not exciting to be lost in the woods at dark. So really my job, as I look at it, is to be the guide, help people get out of the woods, show them exactly what to do every day, go on that journey with them. Yeah, that's kind of the basic reason I started it.
So we're starting to get into the 3D archery season, Total Archery Challenge, Mountain Archery Fest, Team Whiskey, actually they're kind of out by you. They're down in South Lake Tahoe. So
Oh, cool.
if you were into archery, I'd say check them out. But
I need some practice first for sure.
that'd be a great way to practice, man. So with that, people are going to be flying, people are going to be driving in up and down the mountain passes and all that. And so I wanted to have you on and talk about motion sickness. And I know before we started recording, there were some other things that I think we should talk about, but motion sickness was definitely one of them.
Yeah.
Why don't we go into, I guess, is there a difference between motion sickness and like in the truck when you're driving up and down the mountain pass, on the plane, carnival rides? Like, is it all kind of one and the same, like the same root cause?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. I think like always helpful, and I know this can be like not to backtrack too far, but always good to step back and just understand if motion sickness is a sense of not feeling queasy, kind of dizzy, off. Well, what is balance, right? How do you feel balanced? I think the first distinction is to understand that like you can feel dizzy sitting down. So having good balance is different from feeling balanced, right? So if you're driving on a mountain pass, how do you know where you are in space? Your brain sends out workers to gather information. You got your vision, you got your inner ear, and you have your physical sense called proprioception of your body can tell you where you are through tension and all this different stuff. Basically, motion sickness is your brain getting confused about relative motion. That can be you're moving in space, but you can't tell visually how much you're moving, or there's a lot of visual motion that is different than your actual physical motion. That disagreement of sensory systems is a nerdy way to say it would be sensory mismatch can make you feel queasy, right? You're not quite sure, am I moving? Is the world moving? How much am I moving in relation to the world? That disagreement can cause motion sickness, basically.
So it's a miscommunication between the brain, the eyes, the ears, and then the joint receptors, the muscle receptors, that proprioception.
Totally right. Because you have those workers, your eyes, your vestibular system, your proprioception, sending information to your brain. And you could imagine like you're watching a Jason Bourne movie. It's like the shaky cam, he's running in a hallway. Your brain has to realize, like, oh, that's motion on a screen. if you only had your vision as your balance system, you would not be able to tell, am I moving relative to the TV or is the TV moving relative to me? Your brain can check and balance that with your other systems and say, no, that's just visual motion. Like riding in the backseat of a car, you can't see very clearly. That becomes difficult to do. And you can be, your brain's basically confused in a way of where you are in space or what motion is happening.
Okay. So there is a physiological difference between sitting in the front, sitting in the back. Like that, I know it helps with motion sickness, right? But what it like, how does it help?
Yeah, it's actually a perfect example because like why is sitting in the back seat hard? It distorts your vision mainly, right? You see the back of the head, right? So like being in the front seat, you can see where you're going. You can see the motion happening and you feel like, oh, that matches with the motion I'm actually engaged in. Whereas if you can't see what's happening and you're rocking on a getting twisted, like turned on a mountain road, that mismatch of this car seat in front of me is not moving, but my body is disorienting to your brain often. There's different levels of sensitivity to that, certainly, but for most people, it can be, some people are like, I get car sickness since a child. Maybe they're just more susceptible to that, but we can all become motion sick on the wrong circumstances. But
How does one go about preventing that and or treating that?
I mean, I think that's the interesting thing because like what I do is not treat motion sickness. I treat like more pathologic dizziness. Like one of the systems that we've talked about is not functioning well. And that can lead to further distortion, right? That can cause more susceptibility to perceived emotion, that whole jazz. I mean, in terms of treating motion sickness, there's different protocols, and a lot of it is very similar to vestibular therapy. Basically, you're practicing basically strengthening your different systems and helping your brain not get tripped up by weird visual stimulus or weird movement. But that's not something that is often like people don't report to medical providers with the sole complaint of motion sickness often, at least in my experience. People take Dramamine or stuff like that and just kind of grind through it. But there are some protocols that I've seen people use or heard about people using for that. So,
Do you know any of those off the top of your head?
I don't, but I could certainly link them to you and send those to you. In general, just this will make more sense to you and people who are listening. I'll try to explain it, but it's usually like pretty general vestibular exercises and some general like movement sensitivity stuff. So we're looking at like basically moving your body in different ways, maybe shaking your head, doing some different visual tracking stuff. It's nothing super crazy. It's all stuff you could do at home with no equipment or anything like that. It's kind of like a weird balance practice in a way, is maybe the most generalized way to think about it.
Point of that is just to get all three of those systems communicating better.
Exactly right. And that's why I say it's similar to vestibular therapy, because that's what you would do if one of those systems was dysfunctional, is you'd help it work better. But in this situation of motion sickness, you're not dizzy, but you just get motion sick. You're more optimizing a system that's already reasonably functional. You're living your life dizzy free. You're just trying to kind of further optimize a system in that regard.
So you treat, and I looked it up, and I can't remember it off the top of my
Yeah,
head.
you got it. Cervicogenic dizziness, kind of a weird one. So
Yeah. Why don't you, because you do it all online.
yeah.
So, and a lot of times people, and I get this a lot too, like when I used to go to events, people would ask where I'm located and then say I'm all online. Like, well, how do you do that?
Yeah.
And so with cervicogenic dizziness, how walk me through that. How do you go about that online and how does someone know if they have cervicogenic dizziness?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think helpful maybe to tie it into what we were just talking about. So cervicogenic dizziness is an issue with the proprioceptive system, right? So we said you got your brain getting information from your eyes, your vestibular system, and your proprioceptive system. Your proprioceptive system is every joint in your body. You can tell where your wrist is in space with your eyes closed. So if you kind of bend your wrist back and forth, you could pause and be like, I want to bend it halfway this direction. People are insanely accurate at that subconsciously. Your body is using those cells to tell you where you are in space. The highest density of those cells is in the muscles and ligaments of your neck. makes sense because you want to know where your head is for a lot of very functional reasons. Um, it's very important for your brain to understand where your head is in space. There's complex interactions with stabilizing your vision and your balance. So basically, it's really important for you to know where your head is. Your neck positions your head is a good way to think about that. Cervicogenic dizziness is simply a dysfunctional, your neck is no longer accurately telling you where your head is in space, basically. So I think that was your first question of like, what is it? It's not super easy to understand, to be honest. It's an invisible thing, right? But does that make sense? Kind of getting explaining it like that.
Yeah, yeah, I totally get it. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
But
Hopefully, if you're
I,
listening to this and it's like, well, that's weird. It is weird. You're not alone. It's a weird thing to kind of understand. I like that example of using a different joint like your wrist and closing your eyes and just realize I do know where my wrist is. It's kind of like a good way to understand that. How do you do it all online? Interesting, right? I've been doing this for about 4 years. I've never seen anybody in person doing this. Really, what you're wanting to do is help somebody control where their body is in space. That's largely around the movement pattern they're engaging in. So, both the static position of where do they perceive as their neutral or their baseline position? How do they move in and out of that? Is it happening in a way that is accurate? Are they feeling comfortable with that? Does it cause symptoms? Is the tension it creates normal in their neck? Because if the tension's off, your body is uncertain. It uses tension to tell you where you are. So it's mainly like watching people move and fixing, not fixing is maybe the wrong word, helping them move in a way that's more natural to their body, what their brain expects them to be moving.
what does a treatment look like? Obviously, it's different per person, right?
Yeah,
Very individualized. What are like two or three common things that you notice that folks can or notice impairments with folks and then that they need to address with
totally.
systemic disease?
Yeah, I think like the car example is a really good one. Like most people I work with are incredibly symptomatic driving or can be, or symptomatic in a busy store. So it wouldn't take a mountain road anymore for them. Like maybe the average person is not very susceptible to motion sickness or that feeling. And it takes like severe circumstance. People I work with, if the systems aren't quite functional, are very susceptible to that of like, oh, there's cars flashing past, or when you're driving on a highway and the sun's filtering through the trees and it makes that like striated pattern. When I was going through this, that made me super symptomatic, right? I was very sensitive to weird visual distortion like that. So that's very common for people I work with. So it kind of ties into like what the example we were using earlier.
Yeah.
Um, that's because, right, if your neck isn't working well, your brain tries to use your eyes a bunch. It gets sensitive to too much motion visually. It's kind of a weird thing that happens. But the end result is very similar to motion sickness.
Okay.
Kind of getting in depth there, but you asked, what do you do to treat something like this? There's really a couple things. You want to look at what is tight, stiff, and weak that is making their neck move abnormally or weirdly. Like you said, it's often things not to do with their neck, their mid back, their lower back, their hips. Like, how are they moving? You want to help somebody move naturally. And then you want to make sure their brain isn't sensitive to visual stimulus. So you do some of that kind of things that would be more traditional in a vestibular rehab program.
Okay.
So those are like some basics.
Okay. So you're working on desensitization to.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
After that's important though. I think you had asked me in the thing you sent my biggest pet peeve. So I'll get on my soapbox real quick because this ties into so my biggest pet peeve. So if you're dizzy and I'll just take you through this logical question and you'll already know why it bothers me. So you have your brain, your neck, your vestibular system, and your vision. If your neck is not working well, it's like the student in a group project who's not doing anything. Another student is going to do all the work. That's your vision. That's just the way our body works. It's your vision, right? So if you try to desensitize the visual stimulus when your eyes are already overloaded with work, it's going to be catastrophically bad. You're going to get really symptomatic. You cannot desensitize to visual stimulus until all the systems are working and your brain feels comfortable not being dependent on your vision. Number one mistake I see other providers make. I understand it. It's a rare thing that what we're talking about, rare relatively, but it will make people much worse if you mess that up. And I see it literally every week. So that's kind of my biggest pet peeve. So yes, you want to desensitize, but you have to do it in the right way, in the right order, or it will be really bad.
So you want to build up the other two, the inner ear and the proprioception first before you desensitize the visual system.
100%, right? I do like that example. I use that all the time of the high school project. I think we've all been that kid who's like, dude, this is ridiculous. Like, no one is helping me. If in the first example, you're just giving that one kid more stuff to do, that's not helpful, right? They're just like breaking down at the seams. You need to get the other kids doing stuff, and then you can give the group more work, basically.
That's
Yeah.
a never heard that analogy, but that is a hell of an analogy. That's good.
I found it to be useful because I swear I think everybody's been that kid at least once, and you're like, dude, this is terrible. Like, this is not fun at all. I'm not liking this. This is not for me.
Let's go migraines. Let's talk because that's not something. Is that something that you see with the cervicogenic dizziness?
Yeah, that's one's. So I think it's important to understand what a migraine is first, and then what we would be talking about is a vestibular migraine in terms of dizziness. So a migraine is not all the way understood, still being discovered, but it's some complex interaction of your central nervous system, your brainstem, your cranial nerves, basically your brain. Is it just a better and gentle way to think about it? Being irritated in a way, right? There's some chemical issue, maybe a vascular issue. It seems less like that these days. It's like a threshold of your nervous system being passed. That can cause pain, like a traditional migraine, cause aura, things like that. But it can also cause dizziness because you have nerves that deal with balance, right? So vestibular migraine is like a dysfunction of those parts of your nervous system, whether that be the nerve from your vestibular system to your brain or the processing of the information in your brain itself. Super nerdy. Like, it's not an easy thing to understand. So if you're listening to this, I would like not drive yourself nuts trying to parse all that out. Basically, it's like a sensitivity. Your nervous system gets sensitive to something, is maybe a good way to think about it. Often, unfortunately, that can be light, visual motion, stressful environments, car rides. So a lot of the triggers are very similar to what you would see in people who are sensitive to motion sickness or PPPD, like the people are just sensitive to visual stimuli. So those triggers are triggers for more than one diagnosis, basically. Pretty common things to be sensitive to.
PPPD. That's the like I see you talk about that on your social medias. What
Totally.
what does it stand for? And then let's first what does it stand for, and then we'll go into it.
It's a super long thing. So it's like perceived, perceptual, postural dizziness. And I might have that backwards. Let me look it up for you because although I treat it all the time, the acronym is terrible, to be honest. Persistent postural perceptual dizziness. Glad I looked it up. Basically, it means it's all the time and you're perceiving motion that's not happening, is it just a better way to think about it? And that can make you feel off. So yeah, the acronym itself is like, I wish there was a way better name because it's very hard to say and remember.
I had to look it up as I went through
No
PT.
joke. I'll have it for like weeks at a time, and then be like, wait, where does persistent come in this? It's like there's too many P's and there's like the order is hard to remember, so it's confusing.
Yeah. Treatment wise with the cervicogenic dizziness, I saw again, this was something that you had posted that treating it with massage, like rubbing your neck. I know like folks with MS, with kind of more advanced stages of MS, taking away the tension in their muscles helps or it reduces their function, right? Because they rely
Yeah.
on tension. Same, so like when I saw your post, I kind of equated it the same way. Like when you take away the tension in your neck, your body's relying on that tension to help communicate where it's at. Talk to me about the like massage and treating cervicogenic dizziness.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting with MS. And like, that's not something I treat or know a ton about, but I think there's two things that muscle tension is useful for, right? Stability, truly physical stability. Like we use tone that's how your muscles function, basically muscle tone, right? So if you're already weak, which can happen in MS, and you're reducing tone further, it's like increasing weakness, basically decreasing stability. So that could be bad for like a hypermobile person. You don't necessarily want to decrease their tone. Um, they need to be more like braced or strength. You don't want to be hypertonic, but you need to be strong, basically. So there's a physical component. Weirdly enough, though, basically the proprioceptive capability, so your body's ability to tell you where you are in space, is largely around, it uses tension in the muscles and the ligaments and pressure in the joints to do that. So if you distort that tension by dry needling or massage, and it's such a rapid change that the rapidity of the change can be disorienting. Basically, it went from, this isn't made up, it's not like this, but it went from a spectrum of 0 to 100. The muscle tone is 80, then it's 20, too fast, and it's too disorienting. It needs to be a gradual reduction in tone, basically.
So will you see folks flared up? Like, say, if someone's going to in-person PT, you've probably experienced this where they saw someone in person, they're like, yeah, they did a massage and it felt great, but then my
Yeah.
symptoms afterwards, is that a kind of a sign like, hey, this is probably not something that you should be doing, and kind of going back to the school project, like starting to give other people in the school project more stuff to do? If
Hey, I got you on that analogy. I like it.
I'm
That's
going to use it,
good.
man.
Yeah, go for it. That makes me happy. Yes, one, it's I think a good diagnostic thing for cervicogenic dizziness. If altering the tone of your neck makes you dizzy, you didn't do anything to your vision or your vestibular system, right? So it's a good diagnostic thing in that regard. Two, it's incredibly common. I just talked to someone today who had that experience. And yes, I would say it's definitely time to be like, don't mess with that area, because the pain can improve with that, which is annoying, right? It's like it feels better physically, but you're dizzier. It's very common. And for most people, that's not a trade-off they want to make. Like pain is one thing, but dizziness is quite hard to function. Not that pain can't be, but so yeah, very common and not something I recommend unless the area is already pretty calm. I think in general, like a lot of patients' frustration is around not getting answers or good care. But I think like to give a voice to the other side, I honestly think that it's not because providers don't want to help. This knowledge is just not necessarily disseminated widely in schools. It's a rather specific thing. So I know there's a lot of frustration, and certainly I had that of not finding good help, but I truly don't. It's hard to say it's a pet peeve because I don't think it's a malicious thing. But the lack of good information is, you could say it's a pet peeve, or it's something that it's good to address and try to help people just have information about this, because that lost in the woods feeling of not knowing and not feeling like you're weird or you're alone, you're making it up, that messaging is too prevalent in our medical community, I think. And yeah, I think it's something that's worth addressing and trying our best to give people good information. I'm sure in your way it's similar, right? Different information, but an important part of what you do.
You have, going off of that, do you have any resources like books or anything like that that are more patient friendly, or do you yourself have any guides or anything like that, any free stuff that people can check out?
Yeah. Patient friendly stuff is unfortunately scarce in this space. Like it is rarely quite non like readable stuff. Um, It depends, like neck related, dizziness related, there's different stuff. If you're curious, I really like a guy, he's a ENT, his name's Dr. Hain, Hain. He worked at the Chicago Dizziness and Balance Center. He does have patient resources that are written, patient resources, to be patient resources around a lot of topics of dizziness. He's done a lot of work on cervicogenic dizziness that I like. So that would be my go-to. It's not, I wouldn't say it's light reading though, but it is written for a consumer. So that's a nice one. Probably the best thing that I've tried to do is I have a free webinar. If you're hearing what I'm talking about and it sounds like you're in something you're dealing with or you want to know more about it, I would check that out. I've tried to distill it into a way that's more, there's pictures and we talk about it, it's more digestible. It's free, and it's kind of what it is. It's talking about those steps of balance, integrate, grow. So fix the neck stuff, integrate all those systems so you're not dependent visually, help the systems grow stronger. Like I said, it's free, so yeah, that's always good. And I've tried to obviously like make it something that is relatable. I always say to people, like, if you tried to explain your job to me in super complex terms of like, this is boring and sucks, I wouldn't. That's like, it's almost like, I don't know why you'd want to go read some of the stuff that's nerdy, but if you're into it, there's a lot, but that would be like a more accessible version of the information.
Yeah, and I've watched it myself, and it's
Yeah.
moves at a nice pace. It's not doesn't get too into the science. There's some science behind or the science in it, but it's all very digestible for someone who's not in the medical industry. So definitely check out that webinar if you're listening to this and you're hearing what Drew is saying, and you're like, oh, that kind of sounds like me. So check
It's a
out.
good place to start for sure. And there's a lot of other good resources on Instagram and people that I've done content with. So you could find that on my page. There's a lot of smart people on Instagram talking about all sorts of stuff around this space. So
Biggest piece of advice for someone dealing with dizziness.
that's a tough one because it really depends on why you're dizzy. But I would say first thing is if you're acutely dizzy, it's good to go to a medical doctor. There's a lot of reasons that you may be dizzy that are rather serious. You would want to rule those out. That being said, once you rule those out with the appropriate testing, part of the hard part of dizziness is how much anxiety it causes. And once you know, like, hey, I'm not dying, it's really important to try to combat what people will call the dizzy, anxious, dizzy cycle. That idea of it's disorienting and scary to be dizzy. That makes you anxious about it and consumed by thinking about it and all the negative things that could happen. That in turn makes you more dizzy because your nervous system is extremely ramped up. So once you know that you've had the appropriate test to rule out the scary stuff, which it hardly ever is the scary stuff, but it'd be negligent not to say that it can't be. So go get that checked. Trying to combat the anxiety basically is a good piece of advice. Easier said than done, but certainly worth doing. Understanding it's okay, it will get better. You're not going to die. It will pass is a good thing to kind of start with.
Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about that we haven't?
Nah, I think that was fun. I think like the excitement of talking about nerdy stuff never gets old, man. So I'm like, anytime anybody wants to talk about this, I'm down. It's always sometimes surprising people want to talk about it. So I'm like, let's do it. Let's
Oh,
get into
I thought it was I think it's a perfect time of year to get this thing released. I mean, people don't know what PTs do. They don't know that they can help with pelvic floor health. They don't know that they can help with dizziness. People just like, well, shit, this is my life now. And
totally.
I
Yeah.
just like this is what you do and this is what you specialize in. And so any way to get the word out and help you out, that's what I'm going for here.
Yeah, man. I think it's always good. The more you know, good quality information help you make better decisions and stay calm. So, yeah, happy to do it. It was fun to talk about. So,
Yeah. So the stuff that Drew talked about with the links and all that, I'll have that in the show notes. And then I'll also post his Instagram handle and his website and his email in the show notes as well. So you guys can get a hold of him directly. Like that. So, all right, man.
sweet. Well,
Time.
thanks for having me on, man.
You bet. Hey, thank you for tuning in to the Wilderness Fitness Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please head over to your podcast app and consider leaving a review. If you think a friend or a family member may benefit from listening to this podcast, please consider sharing this episode with them. We appreciate your help in the growth of this podcast. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram for even more content and the weekly Hump Day Q&A where you can get all of your human performance, rehab, women's health, and injury prevention questions answered. If you're interested in getting hooked up with even more content from Wilderness PT from the comfort of your own home, head over to wildernessphysicaltherapy.com and get signed up for the Spike Camp membership. This is where you'll have access to prior seminars and a workout that'll have you in shape each fall, designed by yours truly. Since you're there, check out the mid-month media newsletter that goes out 1 to 2 times a month, which includes a variety of topics with the most recent research on health and human performance. You can sign up by hovering over the free resources section and subscribe to any of the free guides, or simply sign up under the mid-month media newsletter tab.